engagement is a hell of a lot more important than a post. It's going to matter so much more than posting more time. So an hour spent engaging is going to do more good for you than an hour spent posting or going into 50 different Facebook groups and putting up these, silly question type of things or whatever, because engagement will always matter more. Welcome to the Certified Badass Online Marketing Podcast, where being a badass has less to do with what you wear and what music you listen to, and everything to do with whether you've got the thriving online business of your dreams. I'm your renegade thinking Harvard Law grad turned online entrepreneur host, Bobby Klinck. In my years building my thriving business, the most important lesson I've learned is that being a badass online marketer isn't about secret strategies or ninja tactics. It's about doing the basic stuff right and showing the F up. So each week here on the show, you'll get clear, easy to execute guidance on how to build your online business and a swift kick in the ass or two to make sure you're getting it done. Hey there, welcome to episode 137 of the Certified Badass Online Marketing Podcast. I'm your host, Bobby Klinck. And I think you're going to like this episode because in this episode, I'm going to do more of kind of building on what I did in last Tuesday's episode, where I'm giving you permission to stop doing some things. Now, this is a bit different. Instead of kind of identifying specific things, I'm going to talk to you about kind of where you focus and how you're viewing things. And specifically, I'm going to be talking about the 80-20 rule, or sometimes for you scientists known as the Pareto principle. Now, I had Perry Marshall on my podcast a while back, and he talked about this, but he was coming at it from sales and marketing and a general perspective. And I wanted to come at it from the perspective of an online entrepreneur. And really talking about kind of what are some of the things that we as entrepreneurs need to be thinking about, and how does the 80-20 rule apply to us? And again, like I said last week, it's going to be hard for me to say stop doing X because it is not, there's no way that it's within what you should be doing as an entrepreneur. But I can give you rules, I can give you principles, I can tell you things that are more likely to be in the important work that you should be doing. So that's what we have in store for this episode. Now, before we dive in, again, part of the work that every entrepreneur does need to be doing is building their list. Building your email list is something that needs to happen day in and day out. The good news is once you set up the process, it doesn't take a ton of work. Now, you have to look at it. You have to make sure that things are still happening and still going according to plan. But once you lay the foundation, it's something that can happen largely in the background. Now, if you are not adding hundreds of people to your list every single week, you need to focus on list building. It's just the reality. I could do the math for you, but if you add 100 people a week to your list, that means you'll add 5,000 people in a year. Now, at least half of those, if not more, are going to leave. And so that means at 100 people a year, you're really only probably going to be adding somewhere on net of maybe somewhere around 2,000 people to your list a year, probably less than that. If you really want to build an online business, you need to be adding more. You need to be building that list more on a consistent basis. So if that's, not where you are, definitely you need to double down on that. If you need help, I would love for you to grab my list building bootcamp, which walks you through how to, kind of do the basics of list building, get things set up in your system so that you can just have this happening on the regular in the background. So you can get access to that by heading over to bobbyklinck.com/list building. Again, bobbyklinck.com/list building. Now, with that out of the way, let's dive in to this episode about the 80-20 rule and why you need to focus on the 20% and ignore the 80%. Now, for those of you who don't know the rule, I want to give a quick overview, but even if you think you know the rule and you've heard it at kind of a top line level, I do want to talk and go deeper with you here so that you can really understand it. The 80-20 rule was originally kind of coined as the Pareto principle, because this scientist, Pareto, kind of discovered that when you look in nature, you would kind of notice this common phenomenon. And the concept was that 20% of X ends up in 80% of the results. And you can apply it across marketing, across sales, across everything you do in business. It tends to prove true. In other words, 20% of the effort you put in will result in 80% of the results. 20% of your customers will account for 80% of your revenue. 20% of your ad spend will account for 80% of the return. And you can see this over and over and over again. Now, again, you can also see this happen like in your life, probably when you were like a student. If you were in a group project, you can kind of say that for the most part, what would happen is one or two people in a group would tend to do most of the work, and the other people would just kind of slack. It is a principle that proves true over and over and over again. But here's the cool thing about it. The 80-20 rule, and I learned this when I had Perry Marshall on my show, is it's what's called fractal, which means you can apply the 80-20 rule within the 20% of your work. In other words, if 20% of your work accounts for 80% of the results, you can say that, again, 20% of that work. So only 4% of your work is going to account for 80% of the 80%, which is 64%. So again, let me put those numbers right next to each other. 4% of your work, 4% of your money, 4% of your effort is going to account for 64% of your results, of your revenue, of all of the things that are good that are happening in your business. If you have a business that has multiple products, multiple price points, and all of those things, you will find something similar, that 4% of your customers will account for 64% of your results, of your revenue. It is a powerful rule. And it was funny when I had Perry Marshall on my podcast and he talked about it, my mind immediately went back to what had happened in my own life back in 2018 when my business was starting to take off. And at that point, people could buy individual legal templates, but I was also trying to sell this legal, quote, membership. And it was a mess, but basically think of it as a course with templates, kind of is what it was, although I was calling it a membership. And I was putting all of my effort into that. I was launching that. I was putting all my ad dollars into that. Everything I was doing was about building that membership. And I wasn't really doing anything to focus on just selling individual legal templates. I don't even think I had any nurture sequences after someone downloaded a freebie to try to get them to buy the equivalent template. I just don't think it happened. People were just could buy them. And my friend Jillian Bowen had a discussion with me. We talked about it, and she said, I think you're complicating this. I think people just want the templates. And I was like, that can't be right. That can't be right. And at least I'm coachable. So I went back and I looked at the numbers. And when I did the numbers, and again, I looked at it and I looked at ad spend and time and effort. And time and effort, of course, was an approximation. But I said that realistically, and again, this was before I knew the 80-20 rule was fractal. I estimated that I was spending 95% of my time, my money, and my effort trying to sell the membership, 5% on the templates. And then when I looked at the revenue, the templates were 65% of my revenue, and the membership, this quote, big thing, was 35%. So again, when you look that out, I was saying that 5% of my effort resulted in 65% of my success. It matches up pretty darn close to that 4%. So that's why I believe in the 80-20 rule and its fractal nature. That's also why you'll hear me talking about your 4% work. Because what I'm saying is, what is the work that is the 20% of the 20%? So 2 levels down of the 80-20 rule applied to what you're doing in your business, and that's kind of a phrase I use. So that's the background. Now I want to move into now I know this, so what does that mean? Well, the goal is to figure out what is your 4% work and do more of it. right? If you figure out that, this is the stuff that is actually moving, so much of my work, it's only 4% of the time I put in, but it is accounting for 65% of my revenue and my results. You want to do more of that. And you want to do less of the other stuff. And so I want you to think about it in this very simple terms. What if you could identify it perfectly, right? And you could say, this is the 4%. These are the tasks that represent that 4% of my time, my effort, et cetera, that are, exactly doing that 64%. So what if you said, okay, and let's say that was, and I'm throwing out a number here because it won't be right, but let's say that was, like 10 hours of what you were doing a month. And you said, well, you know what? What if I do 20 hours of those tasks a month and find 10 hours of the stuff that's not moving my business forward and stopped doing that? If you take that approach, now it's not like you're necessarily going to see like 64% increase in revenue. It won't work out that cleanly, but you will see a huge uptick in revenue because you're focusing your efforts on the things that actually matter. And so that's the power of this 80-20 rule and your 4% work. It is this concept that there are kind of levers in your business that can help you move mountains. Doubling your revenue doesn't mean you have to double your work or double your expenditures. It means you need to identify the stuff that is actually driving your business forward and do a lot more of that and a lot less of the other things. So again, if you think about it, if you found your 4% work and it was 10 hours a month, you say, well, what if I did 30 hours of that a month? That still leaves you like 3.5 weeks, or maybe not a half, but 3 weeks in some time of the month to do other stuff. But if you literally triple the amount of time you've spent on that work, then all of a sudden you could expect, maybe you're not going to double, but that's the kind of work, that is the kind of thing that tends to happen. And so this is part of the reason why you end up kind of having those inflection points that businesses tend to have that. Some of what leads to an inflection point, I'm going to be honest with you, is it's compounding interest. So my podcast right now is at one of those inflection points where it's turning up in downloads. And it's basically that I've just been making investments for the last 2 years. And it's the same thing with my Facebook group strategy. I made investments for 2 years of being the legal guy in certain groups. And so that's starting to pay off. Now, what I would tell you is those are both 4% work in my view. Those are both things that to me is some of my most important work. But I made those investments over time. And so now, that's part of the reputational thing. But the reputational thing that leads to kind of that hockey stick moment. But the other thing that can be a true inflection point, hockey stick moment in your business is when you finally figure out what is your 4% work and double down on it. Or triple down on it. And then, what's going to happen is, you're going to kind of things shake out and change. And then you're going to have to say, okay, well, now stuff that maybe was in my 4% work before isn't. And I need to focus more on, some what was a subset before, but now becomes part of your 4% work. It's this constant process that happens over time where the work and the important work that you need to be doing changes. But over time, if you focus on doing this, your time gets more and more focused on the most powerful work. The most powerful levers in your business, the things that are going to have the biggest impact. And once you start that uptick, it's kind of like a snowball going downhill. It just gets bigger and bigger because all of a sudden, if you get more revenue, guess what? That's when you start building your team. And when you start building your team, you can take a lot more of that, the other stuff off of your plate, which frees you up to do more of the 4% work and more and more. And so at some point, and again, I can see this happening in my business right now as I'm building out my team. I suspect that by the end of this year, so by the end of 2020, that I will be doing nothing but work that I would have said was my 4% work at the end of 2019. In other words, 100% of my time. And that's not actually accurate because I will still do some other piddly little stuff. But more than 90% of the work I'm doing in my business will be what was among the 4% at the end of 2019. And that's only possible because I'm making the investments. I'm focusing on it now. I'm bringing team in. They're taking things off my plate. And I'm seeing these inflection points. And as those inflection and it kind of grows more, I can bring more team in who can take more things off of my plate. And I can focus more and more and more on that stuff that matters. That's the path that you need to set yourself on over time. So that's kind of the construct I want you to be thinking about. Now, if you're at a point where you're like, hey, that's great, Bobby, but I don't have a team yet. How can I do this? Now, I do want you to be thinking, could you potentially start the process by, getting someone, in to help you? And the next episode 138, that'll come out this Friday, I'm going to talk about how a VA could change your life. And I'm going to encourage you to find a way to bring a VA and to start taking some of your time off, the things off your plate. If a VA could come into your business and take 5 hours a week of the stuff that drains you, that is not among your 4% work, that's 5 hours a week you could focus on your 5% or your 4% work. And so you can do this process that simply by making that decision. You can double the time you're spending on, more than double the time, realistically, the time you're spending on the important work in your business. And that will start the snowball rolling. And I know it's hard. I resisted hiring a VA way too long. But if you're open to it, it is something that can make a huge difference. So that's the kind of the big background and the big principle I want you to get. But now I want to talk about kind of the counter to that. And this is not necessarily about the work. This is getting out of the context of your effort. But it's that I want you to stop worrying about the other 80%. So here we're just going to talk about the 80-20 principle, not about your effort, but about other things. And what do I mean by that? Well, I hear people talk all the time, and they're worried about the people who didn't open their emails. They're worried about the people who haven't followed them on social media. They're worried about the people who are on their list but haven't bought. They're worried about all of those kinds of things, and that is all the 80%. And I just want to tell you, when you get a big list, and this is why, in some sense, it's not a huge surprise that realistically, a lot of big name entrepreneurs who build a big list, their open rates tend to hover between 20 and 30%. It's kind of an application of the 80-20 rule. 20% of your subscribers are going to be people who are going to be 80% of your opens, realistically. And you'll get more than that because you'll have some other people randomly wake up in a week and they open it. But it's going to happen with your email list as it grows. Early on, it doesn't happen, but once you get a big enough number, it will happen, and that's okay. And you're going to have people come through your launch, and there's going to be a lot of people who don't buy, and that's going to happen, and that's okay. But what if instead of worrying about the people who don't sign up for your list, who don't open your emails, who don't buy your stuff, what if instead you just said, I'm going to focus on the people who did. I'm going to focus on the people who are on my list. I'm going to focus on the people who do follow me on social media. I'm going to focus on serving the living crap out of the people who open my emails every week. Instead of worrying about, 70% aren't opening, I'm going to say, no, you know what? That means 30% are. And I'm just gonna every week do my damnedest to give them a hell of an email to serve the crap out of them. And I'm going to serve the crap out of my buyers. And when I talk about this, I'm hoping that what you start to see is, if you've heard me talk about the fans framework and the fans first concept, it's built on this concept. It's built on the concept that I'm worried not worried. Worry's not the right word. I'm focused on the super fans. I'm focused on the people who listen to every podcast episode. I'm focused on the people who are saying, when is Bobby's email coming this week? I can't wait to read it. I'm focused on the people who are waiting for me to say, I have something else. Do you want to buy it from me? Because I know those are the people who are my 4% customers, my 4% subscribers, my 4% whatever. They're the ones who will drive my business forward. And I've talked about it in so many different ways, but a recap is, if I serve the living crap out of those people, guess what? They become brand advocates for me. They become promoters. They go out and do those things. A lot of them are literally promoting my stuff before they ever bought from me. I've had people who are on my list. I serve the crap out of them. And so they send people my way, even though they've never bought a thing from me, because maybe they don't need it, or maybe they're not ready, or maybe they don't have the money yet. But when I focus on the people that are in the 20%, and hopefully later, really focusing in on those 4% people, it creates this following, this devotion, this super fan, the raving fan base that I talk about all the time. It's why I have a small but mighty list. I have a small but mighty following. It's why I'm able to outperform people with lists 10 times my size half the time in affiliate offers. Because I have served the crap out of people. So the people who are on my list, who are the devoted email openers, when I tell them, hey, this thing is good, you ought to check it out, they're like, oh, I trust you, I'm going to go check it out. And that's the power of focusing on what's in front of you, not focusing on the other, not worrying about the 80% that isn't actually moving your business forward. It's true of customers. It's true of the work. It's true of the results. Don't worry about it. Just say, it is what it is. I'm going to focus on the other stuff. So that is kind of the counterpart. And this is where I said at the beginning that I'm kind of continuing with this giving you permission. And so the permission I'm giving you is stop worrying, stop spending any mental bandwidth thinking about the people who aren't on your list, who aren't following you, who don't respond, who don't open your emails, who don't buy. And again, I'm not saying it in a rude way, because here's the important thing. When you serve the 20%, when your effort and 100% of your focus is on serving the 20%, kind of the first level of the 80-20, the 20% of your audience who really cares, you're serving everybody then. You're serving them, and also if people in the 80%, you're doing the best you can to serve them. And if they do wake up eventually and start opening, guess what? You're serving them. So focus on serving the 20% of your audience who is really focused on you, and you'll be doing your best. And again, this is where I, in some ways, I'm not a big, huge proponent. You've probably heard my episode about where I think a lot of ICA work is dumb. But what I would say is, if you can really kind of narrow down and identify the 4% subscribers, the people who are your crazy Uber like fans who listen to every podcast episode or read every blog post, like are opening every email, etc. If you can find those people and you can find them and really focus and say, how do I serve that group best? How do I create content that serves those people the best? How do I send emails that serve those people the best? How do I create products and offers that serve those people the best? If you'll do that, everything else will follow, because you will be serving a group who are already there. And when they tell their friends, or there are other people like them who discover you, guess what? You're serving the crap out of those people who would also be in that 4%, who are like that 4%, who have the same problems, the same questions, the same wants, the same, etc. So that's where you ultimately get some superpowers in your marketing when you can do that. So again, it's kind of amorphous, but I'm telling you, focus on figuring out how best to serve first the 20% and then ultimately the 4%. Like, again, I'll just be honest with you. My list size right now, that I'm actively emailing on my kind of general email segment, I think, is like 5,500, somewhere around there, but I'll just use 5,000 because I like round numbers. So my 4% means what I need to do is try to find who are my 200 most engaged people. And if I can identify those 200 most engaged people and just figure out ways to serve them the best way possible, and if I could get every one of them on the phone and do an ICA interview and talk to them and do all those things, then I'm going to be in good shape. So that's kind of, in a sense, where my mind is. When I'm creating these podcast episodes, I'm thinking of those 200 people. When I'm writing my emails, I'm thinking about those 200 people. So I give you that as a sense of, try to have a sense of what it is that I'm talking about. And what I'll tell you is, if you have 200 people like that who are your crazy Uber fans, your business will take off in this online space, because they will become the people who start telling everybody else about you. So that's the focus. Now I want to kind of transition and talk about some general rules to think about when you're thinking about kind of the combination of what's your 4% work, and how do you serve your 4% or your 20% people? I mean, kind of, because you're like, okay, great, Bobby, can you make it concrete? And I can't necessarily tell you, don't do this as general rules, but I can tell you things that you generally should do. Number one, focus on engaging with people. Engaging and actually having conversations will always be a bigger kind of, more important work than thinking megaphone. And on social media, it's a perfect example, right? A lot of people think of social media as a megaphone. And by the way, this is part of why in last Tuesday's episodes, why one of the things I said is that being everywhere on social media, you should stop doing that. Because if you are trying to be everywhere, what you're doing is treating social media largely as a megaphone. You're just thinking, I'm going to shout and people are going to hear it. Well, what I'll tell you is that engaging, actually talking with people, actually being social, actually, kind of getting into conversations, whether it's in comments, in groups, in the DMs, wherever it is, that engagement is a hell of a lot more important than a post. It's a heck of a lot. It's going to matter so much more than posting more time. So an hour spent engaging is going to do more good for you than an hour spent posting, or going into 50 different Facebook groups and putting up these, silly question type of things or whatever, because engagement will always matter more. So that's one thing I want you to think about, and think engagement. And again, this is where it's kind of weird, because a lot of us entrepreneurs who are in the online space, we call ourselves introverts. I'm not. I'm an extrovert. I just had to find my people. But a lot of us are saying, well, how can I find a way to market without having to talk to people? I mean, that honestly is why so many people are in the online space. I got bad news for you. Talking to people matters. Now, you can do it online. You can do it virtually. But those conversations, those back and forths will do more than anything else. And here's what I'll tell you. If you can get good at remembering things about people who are your followers, that can be huge. I mean, when I have conversations with people and they start telling me, well, I'm so-and-so. I'm like, oh yeah, I know you bought this from me then. Or I know we had this conversation about that. They are blown away. They're blown away that I know who they are. That kind of, small act, huge. And it only happens because I'm focusing on connecting and engaging, not megaphoning. So that's the first thing. The next general rule, responding to people. And you've heard me talk about this, and this is where maybe some of you who heard me talk about don't do your customer support are going to be confused. If people send you an email, respond. Now, again, I'm not talking about the general customer support. But if people respond to your weekly email, if they send you a reply, hit reply and write them back. And again, this is kind of just an output, it's an outgrowth of the engagement. So engagement on social media is about responding to people, right? It's about when they say something, you respond to them. You actually take the time to do those things. It's the same thing with email. Get in your inbox and respond to people who take the time to say something meaningful to you. And that kind of thing, again, breeds loyalty, breeds people who feel, wow, this is a person who actually cares, which breeds superfans, which breeds the 4%, which will get more people over there. So again, it's not scalable. I mean, if 100% of your lists were doing this, you couldn't do it. But they're not. And that's the reason why you're able to do it. So that's the next thing. Now, from there, I want to say that too many people don't take the time to serve their existing customers the best way possible. And I have to be honest with you, this is something that I have screwed up from time to time. And I'm not talking necessarily about, about not delivering on something. But what I'm talking about is, are there ways that you could serve your existing customers? So if you have multiple products, are you making sure that people who've already bought from you are aware of your other products that might be relevant to them? And again, I think a lot of people feel like, oh, that's salesy. I don't know if I want to do that. I don't know if I want to push my existing customers. And look, you could do it in a very salesy way, which would not be good. Or you can do it in a way that is not really salesy. But we've all heard this concept, and it's just so true, which is that it's more expensive to acquire a new customer than to get an existing customer to stay and to buy something else. Because there's someone who's already bought from you, assuming and I'm assuming because you're listening here that you're not putting crap out there, that you're not just producing crap products that people are like, I don't want anything from this person again. But assuming you're putting out a good product, you had already gotten them to the point of a know, like, and trust enough to buy from you once. They had a good experience because you gave them a good product. Guess what? They're going to be primed to buy from you again if you have another product that's relevant to them. If you have a way to explain to them, hey, if you need this too, I have it also, and here's how you can buy it. That kind of thing can be hugely valuable. Now, your business and everybody's business is going to be different, and we have to think about these things. And I want to be clear. I'm not suggesting that you constantly feel like you have to add more products to keep serving your people. Like some people feel like they got to have a $20 product, a $100 product, a $400 product, a $1,000 course, a $5,000 group coaching program, and then a $25,000 mastermind. And they've got to have all those levels so that they can move people's seamlessly up the value ladder, as it's called. Well, in a mature business, you are going to have cheap products, mid-level products, expensive, and then very expensive products. But you don't need that to begin with. And that's not what I'm suggesting. What I am suggesting is if you have multiple product lines, that you think about the people who are already your buyers as someone that you want to treat well first. And we're working on this as I'm creating new funnels. For example, on the business side, I'm thinking, hey, how can I tell them, hey, if you like this, I've got this legal stuff that will protect you and help you as well, if you happen to need it. And similarly, I'm trying to find ways when we bring people in on the legal side to bring them over to the business side. So I'm just thinking through that. And that's part of the strategizing that we are doing in my business right now, because we want to say, how can we kind of cultivate our existing customers and existing buyers? So I want you to think that is something that you should be thinking about. Because again, they've already not just put their hand up, they've pulled out a credit card and given you money. So that is an important thing to think about. Now, the next piece is kind of one level down from that, is focus on your existing leads and your existing followers. And this is something I've heard my friend Tyler J. McCall talks about it like on Instagram. He says, now, if you're not getting engagement and not making sales to the 1,000 people on your list or, who follow you on Instagram, why do you think that having 10,000 is going to make a difference? His point is focus on serving the 1,000 people. And I already talked about this on the Fans First, but the same thing with your email leads. And I will have this question come up and people will ask me, well, what happens when I introduce a new freebie and all that? And I said, well, when I introduce a new freebie, I generally tend to just send it to my existing list, unless I want them to go through something that happens after they download. But otherwise, I'm just going to give it to them. I'm going to say, hey, I created this new freebie. Thought you'd like it. Here you go. Download it. I don't make them sign up for anything again because, there's no point. Just have them click on a button and grab it. Make your people who have already raised their hand and said they want to hear from you feel special. That is part of your 4% work. Because if you do that, you're focusing on that. And again, let's bring it back to the people you're serving are, number one, it's the people who've already decided, yes, they want to be on your list. And realistically, when you just send them an email with it, you're also serving the 20% who are then opening your email, right? Because those are the people who are going to get value. The other people who don't open it aren't, but fine, it is what it is. And so you really are doing the things of focusing on serving the people who can drive your business forward. So again, focus on that. And then again, we could go beyond that, focus out, you can kind of go out and think, how far out do you need to go? Depends on how much time you have. So beyond your leads, you could say, well, okay, I should focus on people who, are seeing my social media. Okay. And that's good. You can do that. And when you get to Facebook ads, I would tell you, you're going to focus first on these inner circles, and then you're going to focus on your warm audience on social media. And then you're going to focus on, slightly bigger audiences over and over again until you find your limit. But focus first on the most engaged, on the people who have done the most to raise their hand and say, I want to follow you. I want to be one of your super fans. Start from there and only move out when you still have time. And so it might mean that at some points, all you're doing is focusing on serving existing leads. Now, again, you got to have list building happening in the background. But my point is that, 90% of your time could be focused on serving the existing people in your world. So those are kind of some general rules to help you find it. And that's kind of where I want to wrap this episode because, again, this is an episode that has largely been kind of theoretical, but I've tried to give you some best practices. But the important concept I want you to be thinking about is I want you to constantly be thinking about the 80-20 rule. And then the layer down, I want you to constantly be thinking about what is my 4% work and who are my 4% people. If you can answer those two questions and focus more of your time on doing your 4% work and more of your time serving your 4% people, your business will take off. And it will start to grow because those are the places where little bits of time, little bits of effort, little bits of money can have huge impacts and really move things along. And so I want to encourage you to do that. And this is where I want to come back to. I want you to encourage you to come back this Friday, especially if you're someone who is resisting making that first hire. Because in Friday's episode, I'm going to be talking about how a VA can change your life. And making that first hire can be scary. It can, be, you're looking at it and you're saying, wow, maybe you're saying it's $100 a week or it's $150 a week I've got to come up with to pay this person. What I want you to think of is it is an investment. You're paying $100 a week or you're paying $150 a week so that you can spend an extra 5 hours a week doing the 4% work, the work that's actually going to pay you dividends. And so we'll talk about that on Friday. So tune in then because, again, it is a great episode and it's going to help you kind of to start to be able to apply the lessons we talked about today. So now it's your turn to go out there and be a badass. I'll talk to you later. That's it for this episode of the Certified Badass Online Marketing Podcast. Make sure to tune in next time. And in the meantime, go out and build the badass business of your dreams.